My mother canceled my wedding and called it a circus, while my sister smirked and said, "Better luck next time." I simply replied, "Understood." But weeks later, when they came begging for help, I texted back coldly, "The circus is already full." My mother wore Chanel to her fraud, hearing an ivory double-breasted jacket, her signature good pearls, and low-block heels the color of cream. She looked like she was attending an elegant charity luncheon rather than sitting in a courtroom, answering for the $150,000 she had stolen from her own daughter. She had quietly, methodically, over the course of 11 years stolen from her own daughter. That daughter was me. I was sitting 12 feet away from her in a gray blazer I'd bought the week before because I needed something that said, "I am not destroyed." I watched her arrange herself in her chair with the practiced composure of a woman who had never once in her adult life been held accountable for anything. She smoothed her lapel. She touched her pearls. She looked straight ahead. She did not look at me. That was fine. I had enough to look out for both of us. I should tell you who I was before all of this because the before matters. The before is the thing that makes the after make sense. My name is Olivia Reed. I'm 29 years old. I work as a senior project coordinator for a mid-sized architecture firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of job that sounds unglamorous and is actually deeply satisfying if you're the type of person who likes order, systems, and the quiet pleasure of making complicated things work. I am that type of person. I have been since childhood. Probably because childhood in the Reed household required it, my mother, Patricia Reed, is the kind of woman people describe as formidable. Tall, well-dressed, socially precise, she ran the household the way a general runs a campaign. Strategically, with a clear hierarchy and very little tolerance for deviation from the plan. My father, Robert, was mild and agreeable in the way that men sometimes are when they've spent 30 years next to a force of nature. He smiled a lot. He deferred constantly. I used to think it was love. I understand now it was something more complicated. My sister Grace is 3 years younger than me and has always been, in my mother's cosmology, the more promising planet. Grace is prettier in the conventional way my mother values. Lighter hair, smaller nose, the particular kind of effortless femininity that photographs well at country club events. Grace is also, I would come to understand, willing. Willing to agree. Willing to accept, willing to look away from things that deserve to be looked at directly. That willingness was currency in our family. I was never very good at spending it. And then there was Ethan. Ethan Marsh came into my life 4 years ago through a mutual friend at a housewarming party. He was a civil engineer, 32, quiet in crowds, and funny in private. The kind of man who fixes things around your apartment before you finish explaining what's broken. I loved him in the straightforward, unglamorous way I love most things that matter to me, steadily, without performance. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in our kitchen while I was doing dishes, which sounds unromantic and was actually the most romantic thing I've ever experienced, because it meant he wasn't waiting for the right lighting. He just wanted to ask. My mother did not like Ethan. She had never said so directly. She was too skilled for directness, but I felt it in the way you feel a draft in a room. The temperature was always slightly wrong when his name came up. He was from Ohio. His family didn't summer anywhere. He drove a Ford F-150 that was 6 years old. These things were never said out loud. They didn't need to be. When I told her we were engaged, she smiled and hugged me and said, "How wonderful, darling." And I believed her because I had spent 29 years wanting to. That was the mistake I made first. There were others. 6 weeks before the wedding, my mother called me on a Sunday afternoon with an offer that she framed, as she frames most things, as generosity. "Let me handle the vendor payments," she said. "You focus on the fun parts, the dress fittings, the rehearsal dinner. Leave the logistics to me." I hesitated. I remember the hesitation, a small internal friction, a thing that knew better trying to get my attention. I ignored it. I was 30 days out from the most important event of my life, and my mother was offering to help, and I had wanted her help, her genuine, enthusiastic help for so long that I couldn't afford to look too closely at the offer. "Are you sure?" I said. "Of course," she said. "You're my daughter." I gave her the vendor list, every name, every contact, every payment schedule. Ivy Oaks Garden, our venue, $8,400 balance due. Sable Floral Design, $3,200. Cornerstone Catering, $6,800. Whitmore Photography, $4,500. 14 vendors total. I put together a tidy spreadsheet because I am who I am, and I emailed it to her with a note that said, "Thank you, Mom." I even added a heart. For 3 weeks, she sent me receipts, confirmation emails, forwarded vendor responses, a Google Drive folder she'd set up called Olivia's Wedding Payments. Everything looked right. I glanced at the documents the way you glance at a smoke detector, reassured by its presence, not looking closely enough to notice the battery was dead. The first call came on a Thursday morning, October 12th, at 9:18 a.m. I know the time because I just sat down at my desk with coffee, and I remember looking at the clock after, trying to understand how 11 minutes could completely rearrange a life. It was Sarah Tillman, the events coordinator at Ivy Oaks Garden. Professional, careful voice. The voice of someone delivering bad news they've been asked to deliver by their manager. "I'm calling about the cancellation of your November 4th booking," she said. I set down my coffee. "I'm sorry. We received a signed cancellation notice last week. I assumed you'd already sorted an alternative, but I wanted to confirm before we release your date." "Sarah." My voice was very level. "I didn't send a cancellation notice." A pause. "We have a signed document. Your name, your signature. Can you send it to me right now while I'm on the phone?" It arrived in 40 seconds. I opened it. There was my name, Olivia Reed. There was my signature, or something close enough to my signature that if you weren't me, you wouldn't question it. The loops of the O were slightly wider than I make them. The tail of the D curled differently, but it was close. It was very, very close. I told Sarah to hold the date. I told her there had been an error. I told her I would call back within the hour. I hung up and stared at my screen. And then the florist called, then the caterer, then the photographer. By 10:45 a.m., I had received 5 calls and 5 versions of the same conversation. Cancellation notice, signed document, my name, that almost signature. The calls kept coming through the lunch hour. The cake designer, the hair and makeup team, the string quartet, 7 vendors, then 9, then 11. Every single one. Someone had contacted every vendor on my spreadsheet, the spreadsheet I had given only to my mother, and canceled my wedding. On paper, in my name. I sat in a bathroom stall at my office for 6 minutes and breathed through it, not crying. Something colder than crying. Then I washed my face, went back to my desk, and picked up my keys. I drove to my mother's house without calling first. 40 minutes on I-85, the kind of drive where you don't remember any of it afterward, because your mind is elsewhere entirely. I parked in her driveway at 12:33 p.m. and walked through the front door, which was unlocked, as it always was because my mother believed locked doors were for people who had something to hide. She was in the kitchen arranging roses from the garden in a crystal vase, pale pink, the long-stemmed kind she grew specifically for the kitchen table. She was wearing a cream linen blouse and her reading glasses pushed up on her head when I walked in with the mild, pleasant expression of someone who had just been thinking about nothing in particular. "Olivia, I didn't know you were coming by." I held up my phone with the cancellation document on the screen. "Why?" I said. She looked at the phone. Then she picked up her shears and snipped the bottom off a stem, a clean diagonal cut, and placed it in the vase. "It's for your own good," she said. "Ethan isn't right for you. You'll understand that eventually. One day, you'll thank me." My sister Grace materialized in the doorway from the living room. I say materialized because she had the specific quality in that moment of someone who had been waiting. Arms crossed, shoulder against the frame, the slow smile of someone who already knew the ending of the scene. "We're protecting you," Grace said. 2 of them, 1 script. I looked at my mother. I looked at Grace. I looked at the roses in the vase, pale and perfect and completely undisturbed. I left without a word. In the car, I sat with both hands on the steering wheel for a long time. The thing I felt was not grief. Not yet. It was something more precise. The specific sensation of a question you've been too afraid to ask your whole life suddenly becoming unavoidable. I drove home. I opened my laptop. The receipts my mother had sent me over the past 3 weeks were in a folder on my desktop, them one by one. She'd been meticulous. Amounts matched, vendor names matched, dates were plausible. Nothing, at first glance, looked wrong. I looked at the account numbers. I looked at them for a long time because something about them was familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. Not the specific digits, just the shape of them, the format. An account number I'd seen before, somewhere, in a different context. I went to my filing cabinet, the one in my home office closet that I'd carried through 3 apartments and never fully gone through because it contained the accumulated paper residue of childhood. Old report cards, birthday cards, my college acceptance letters, things my mother had pressed on me over the years with the instruction to keep this. You might need it someday. I found the folder near the back of the bottom drawer inside a manila envelope with my full name written on it in my mother's handwriting. Olivia Catherine Reed. The tab said Custodial Account College Fund. My parents had mentioned this account twice in my life, briefly in the context of, we set aside some money when you were small. It went toward your college costs. I had never questioned it. I had paid for most of college through scholarships and my own part-time work, and I'd assumed the fund had been small and had covered the gap. I'd never asked for a number. It had never occurred to me to ask. I opened the envelope. Inside were statements. Old ones from years back, 2009, 2011, 2013. I looked at the account number on the oldest statement. Then I looked at the account number on my mother's vendor receipt. They matched. I sat with that for a moment. My chest did something complicated, a slow dropping sensation like an elevator losing cable. My mother hadn't paid the vendors from her own account. She'd paid from mine, from a custodial account in my name that I had never had access to and had been told my entire adult life was spent, except the statements I was holding suggested it hadn't been spent on college. My hands were very still. I was aware of that, the stillness of them, because stillness in that moment cost something. I picked up my phone and called a number I had in my contacts under a name I hadn't dialed in almost 2 years, Miss Carter, attorney. Margaret Carter had been my grandfather's estate lawyer for 23 years. She was 71, semi-retired with the crisp, unsentimental manner of someone who had seen too much family ugliness to be surprised by it. She had handled my grandfather's will when he died 8 years ago. I had her number because she'd sent me a card when he passed and written "Call me if you ever need anything" at the bottom, and I'd put it in my phone thinking I never would. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Miss Carter," I said. "This is Olivia Reed, Thomas Reed's granddaughter." A beat? Olivia? Yes, of course. I think something is wrong with an account my parents managed for me. I found some documents, and I stopped steadied. I need someone to help me understand what I'm looking at. She was quiet for a moment. A specific kind of quiet, not hesitation, but something more like recognition. "Can you come to my office tonight?" she said. 7. Margaret Carter's office was in a low brick building near the courthouse. The kind of office that has been the same for 30 years and is better for it. Dark wood, floor-to-ceiling files, a desk covered in the organized chaos of someone who knows where everything is. She was already at her desk when I arrived at 6:58 p.m. with the custodial account folder under my arm. She looked at the folder when I set it on her desk. Her expression didn't change, but she went very still in the way that experienced people go still when they recognize something serious. She slid a manila folder across to me. It had my name on the tab. "Before you show me yours," she said, "I want to show you something." Inside was a document I had never seen. A trust agreement. My grandfather's handwriting on the cover page, in the careful cursive of an 82-year-old man who'd learned penmanship when penmanship was taught. The Olivia Catherine Reed Trust, established March 14, 2004. The number at the top of the first page made my vision blur at the edges. $275,000. My grandfather had been a quiet man, a retired electrician who drove a 10-year-old Buick and grew tomatoes in his backyard. I had known he was careful with money. I had not known he was this careful, or that the beneficiary of 25 years of careful living was me. The trust had conditions, Miss Carter explained in the steady voice of someone reading facts into evidence. The principal was protected and untouchable until the triggering event. The triggering events were two. I turned 30 years old or I got married, whichever came first. Upon the trigger, a mandatory audit would follow. Every dollar in and out of the trust since its establishment would be examined by an independent financial auditor. Every transaction would need to be accounted for. Miss Carter began sliding bank statements across the desk one at a time. Not the custodial account statements I'd brought, different ones, trust statements, official quarterly reports that I had never received that had been sent based on the mailing address on file to my parents' house. Kitchen renovation, August 2014, $25,000. Grace's boutique startup initial capitalization, January 2017, $50,000. European anniversary trip, April 2016, $11,400. Country club annual dues, 7 consecutive years, $4,800 each. My father's Lexus, financed partially through trust disbursement, March 2019, $18,500. The statements kept coming. My mother had listed each withdrawal with a category: educational support, family maintenance, estate management. The language of someone who had thought about what to call things before anyone asked. The language of someone who had planned. Over 11 years, $151,400 gone. I sat in that chair and I did not make a sound. I was aware of my own breathing, slow, deliberate, aware of the fluorescent hum of the office light, aware of Miss Carter's hands folded carefully on the desk. She wasn't watching me with pity. She was watching me with the measured attention of someone waiting for me to finish understanding. My mother hadn't canceled my wedding because she disliked Ethan. She'd canceled it to stop the audit. She'd forged my signature on 11 cancellation notices to 11 vendors so that the wedding would not happen. The trigger would not be pulled, and the $124,000 still remaining in the trust would not be examined by a financial auditor who would spend approximately 40 minutes finding what Miss Carter had found in 90. Every time my mother called me ungrateful, she was spending my money. Every birthday card signed with all my love, every holiday dinner, every performance of family, funded in part by a trust my grandfather had built for me that I had never known existed. Grace's boutique, my mother's kitchen, the Lexus my father drove to his golf games, my future, all of it. I looked at Miss Carter. "File it," I said. "File everything." She nodded once, slowly, like she'd been waiting for exactly those words. "There's one more thing," she said, and pulled out a final document. "The forged signatures? I want you to look at something." She placed my cancellation notice, the one Sarah Tillman at Ivy Oaks Garden had sent me, next to a signature card on file with the trust. Both bore the name Olivia Reed. "A forensic document examiner can confirm what I believe we're both already seeing," she said. "But I want to prepare you. This isn't just civil fraud, Olivia. Forging legal documents, cancellation notices, signature cards. This is criminal." The word criminal sat between us on the desk like an object. "Who do I need to talk to?" I said. The next 72 hours moved in the specific way that crisis moves, simultaneously very fast and very slow. The world rearranging itself while you stand in the middle of it trying to keep your footing. Miss Carter referred me to a forensic document examiner named Dr. Philip Okafor, who had a PhD in question document analysis from Ohio State and had testified as an expert witness in 47 court cases over 18 years. I sat in his office on a Friday afternoon and watched him study my cancellation notices under a magnification loupe for 37 minutes without saying anything. Then he looked up. "The pressure pattern is consistent with a left-handed writer," he said. "Your natural signature shows right-hand dominance throughout. The pen lifts happen in different places. The proportional spacing of the letters is off by approximately 12%. He set down the loupe. "Someone studied your signature and replicated it carefully, but a careful copy is still a copy." He submitted his written findings to Miss Carter as Exhibit C. On Saturday morning, I met with Detective Angela Hurst at the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department. Detective Hurst had been with financial crimes for 14 years, direct, efficient, the kind of person who takes notes with a mechanical pencil and asks questions in the precise order that will be most useful later. She listened to me for an hour, She asked me to bring every document I had. I brought a folder with 31 pages of evidence tabbed and labeled, because I am who I am. She looked at the folder and said, "You organized this yourself?" "Yes." "Okay." She made a note. "Miss, read, based on what you've described, the trust misappropriation, and the forged signature documents, we're looking at potential wire fraud, criminal forgery under North Carolina General Statute 14119, and breach of fiduciary duty as a trust co-administrator." She looked at me evenly. "This is serious." "I know," I said. "Your mother is the signatory on the trust co-administration agreement?" "Yes. My father as well, but Miss Carter believes he may not have been the primary actor." She made another note. "I'll need to pull the trust account records through a subpoena, which will take a few days. Don't discuss this with your family until we've had a chance to detective," I said. "I haven't spoken to my mother since Thursday." She looked at me. Good. She wasn't the only one who called that week. On Sunday at 11:47 p.m., my phone lit up with my mother's name 3 times in a row, unanswered, and then a text that said, "Olivia, I know you're upset. Please call me. We should talk as a family before this goes any further." My sister texted separately. "Mom is worried. She just wants what's best for you. You know that." I screenshot both. I forwarded them to Miss Carter. The hardest call of that week wasn't to a detective or an attorney. It was to Ethan on Friday night when I sat on our couch and told him everything. The trust, the forgeries, cancellation notices, the $150,000. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started to worry. Then he said, "So she canceled our wedding to hide the money?" "Yes." "And the money was yours the whole time?" "Yes." He reached over and took my hand. He didn't say anything else for a while. We sat like that until the room got dark and I realized neither of us had turned on the lights. "What do you want to do?" he said finally. "I already told the lawyer to file," I said. He nodded. "Then we book a new venue." He said it so simply, like it was obvious, like the answer to someone stealing your wedding was just to get another one. I love him the way I love most things that matter, steadily, without performance. But that night, I felt it with an acuteness that I don't have the right words for. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in December, 49 days after the first call from Ivy Oaks Garden. 49 days that had contained more truth than the previous 29 years. Miss Carter had filed a civil fraud claim, seeking the full trust misappropriation plus damages. Detective Hurst's financial crimes investigation had resulted in separate criminal charges, criminal breach of fiduciary duty, and 2 counts of forgery filed by the DA's office. The proceedings were coordinated. We were in civil court first. I arrived early. I sat in the second row behind our table and watched the gallery fill. My parents' friends were there. 4 or 5 women from my mother's social circle, the country club set, the kind of women who attend things like this to have something to say about them later. My Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, was in the back row with her hands folded in her lap, looking like she'd known something was wrong for a long time. My father came in first, shoulders hunched, walking like a man trying to make himself as small as possible. He sat at the respondents' table without looking in my direction. Then my mother, Chanel jacket, ivory, her good pearls, low-block heels the color of cream. She sat down with the careful composure of a woman who has decided that the best defense of a person who has done something indefensible is to look as though they haven't. She touched her pearls. She arranged her hands. She looked straight ahead. She did not look at me. Miss Carter opened by putting the trust document on the courtroom screen. Then she put the bank statements up, 1 slide per transaction, building the architecture of what had happened year by year, dollar by dollar, with the methodical patience of someone who understands that the most devastating thing you can do with the truth is simply to show it completely. The gasps from the gallery were quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from people who have attended enough luncheons with Patricia Reed to have strong feelings about who she presented herself to be. Grace had her face in her hands by the 3rd slide. My father had gone the specific gray color of a man who had let things happen and was now understanding what that meant. When the trust administrator's independent audit report went up, The one showing $151,400 in unauthorized disbursements across 11 years. I watched my mother's hand rise slowly to her pearls, the gesture she had made my entire life when she needed to ground herself in something that confirmed who she believed she was. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Frances Delacroix, 26 years on the bench, who had the particular quality of experienced jurists, absolute stillness and economy of expression, so that when she did speak, every word registered. The evidence presented, Judge Delacroix said, establishes a clear and sustained pattern of misappropriation over 11 years from a trust established for the sole benefit of the petitioner. The respondent's characterization of these withdrawals as family expenses does not constitute a legal basis for disbursement from a restricted trust. A pause. Love is not a defense for fraud, Mrs. Reed. Concern is not a defense for theft. The gavel came down. $227,000 in my favor. The principal balance of the trust minus what had been legitimately expended, plus damages, plus legal costs. Immediate. I stood up. I buttoned my blazer. I picked up my bag. In the hallway, my mother's heels were sharp and fast on the marble floor behind me. I felt her hand on my arm before I heard her voice. Olivia. Her voice had a quality I had never heard in it before. A crack in the surface. The specific fracture of a control that has finally met its limit. We're still family. Whatever has happened, we're still family. We can talk about this. We can find a way to. I looked at her hand on my arm, then I looked at her face. For the first time in my memory, she looked her age, 63. The lines around her eyes deep, her composure not gone but eroding, the pearls at her throat exactly the same pearls they'd always been, funded by exactly the source I now knew. You canceled that, too, I said. I turned and walked toward the doors. The light through the courthouse windows was winter, pale and clean, and when I pushed through to outside, the cold air hit me in a way that felt like something opening rather than something closing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I stopped on the courthouse steps and looked at the screen. A number I didn't recognize. Georgia area code. A text. 3 lines. Olivia Reed. I know what happened in court today. There is something else about your family that you don't know yet. Something much larger than the trust. I've been trying to reach the right person for 2 years. Please call me. I stood there in the thin December sun and read it 3 times. My mother had stolen my future to buy herself a present that was already rotting before I'd found it, and now someone was telling me there was something bigger. I called. 6 months later, I married Ethan on the back lawn of a vineyard 20 miles outside the city. May evening, warm and green, the kind of light that only exists for about 40 minutes before sunset and makes everything look like something that should be remembered. Our officiant was a college friend of Ethan's. The flowers were simple, ranunculus and eucalyptus because I liked them, not because they photographed well. My grandfather's trust funded the wedding, every dollar of it. The criminal case against my mother and father moved slowly, as criminal cases do, and I won't pretend I know how it ends yet, because as of this telling, it hasn't. What I know is that there are now 2 counts of forgery and 1 of criminal breach of fiduciary duty being argued by a DA who seems, from what Miss Carter tells me, genuinely motivated. I also know that the person who texted me on the courthouse steps was a man named David Roque, and what he told me when I called him will require its own story, told when I'm ready. What I know for certain is this. I spent 29 years performing for an audience that had already decided what the performance was worth. I spent 29 years calling that love because I didn't have a better word. I have better words now. My mother's social circle has quietly reorganized around her absence. The country club sends renewal notices. She, from what I understand, is spending her time and whatever money remains, her own this time, on a lawyer who is working very hard. Grace has not contacted me. I don't expect her to. The vineyard photos came back last week. In one of them, my favorite, Ethan is looking at me while I'm saying something to a friend, and his expression is the expression of a person who has decided to keep something, to hold on to it carefully. I put it on the desk where I used to keep the wedding binder. The binder is gone. I closed it and I kept walking, and what was on the other side of walking was everything.